My name is Davis Malombe, Executive Director, Kenyan Rights Commission. I will pick it from there. Its full enforcement is made more urgent by the recent scandals and the official audit findings that have been uncovered widespread conflict of interest violations. And here we are focusing on select 7 scandals which have been published by the Office of the Auditor General, and also some of them publicized by the media houses. So we are talking about amounts coming to 158 billion in total out of the 7 scandals we are referring to. So the first one is the Kenya shillings 45 billion NTSA bill. The Dead Nations newspaper reviewed a Kenya shillings 45 billion public-private partnership between NTSA and a private firm allegedly linked to State House, which is riddled with conflict of interest, lack of transparency, and undue political influence. This points to potential violations of the Conflict of Interest Act on failure to declare private interest, granting unlawful preferential treatment, and prohibiting public officers from benefiting from or having interest in contract with their own entities. If public officials or their associates were involved in awarding or benefiting from these contracts, this constitutes a direct breach of the Act. Number 2, report of the Auditor General on national government ministries, departments, and agencies for the year 2023-2024. The recent Auditor General's reports exposed irregular procurement practices involved in SHA smart system, including lack of transparency and accountability in the procurement of the healthcare system that cost taxpayers Kenya shillings 104 billion, alongside the troubling fact that the state does not own the health system's intellectual property. These actions likely contravene the provisions of the Act, especially if public officials or their associates are linked to the consortium controlling the system or benefiting from the deal. Number 3, the Auditor General's report on the e-Citizen platform. In March 2025, the Auditor General released a report revealing the loss of 90 billion on e-Citizen platform, revealing troubling gaps in governance, transparency, and financial accountability. The lack of a centralized accountability mechanism has allowed billions to move through shadowed channels. If public officials were involved in selecting or benefiting from financial service providers without disclosure, this would breach the provisions of the Act. These risks demand immediate investigation and accountability. Number 4, the construction of the church in State House. Most troubling is the proposal to construct a multi-billion shillings church at State House, presented as a private initiative by the President, but using public land and raising fundamental questions about the misuse of the office and the public assets for personal religious interests which have nothing to do with the public.
I'll continue with the scandals that we are highlighting, which have linkages to conflicts of interest. Insurance rip-off of Kenyans whenever they pay for health insurance. Recently, the Standard newspaper highlighted yet another alarming corruption scandal involving rogue officials in the health sector, accused of colluding with insurance firms and brokers to suspend operations, pocketing plum premiums. This practice has effectively turned the healthcare system into an insurance scam, directly demeaning citizens' constitutional right to access healthcare. For instance, patients covered under the Social Health Insurance Fund, SHIF, are being turned away or forced to pay out of pocket, yet premiums are deducted every month, but many cannot access treatment when it is needed. This has especially been highlighted for civil servants and teachers under the Teachers Service Commission. This points to a possible misuse of public funds, abuse of office, particularly where officials overseeing or linked to the SHIF system may be benefiting indirectly through delayed payments or redirection of funds. We wonder what the conflicted interests are here. The other area of conflict of interest is extortion by parliamentarians. It has been in the public domain that there are several revelations of members of parliament being bribed or extorting people. This particular problem is particularly very deep, where members of parliament serving in oversight committees have allegedly been demanding bribes from the executive, including the presidency, governors, and ministers, and other officials to produce or withhold reports, effectively turning committee work into transactional affair, and this sometimes goes all the way to the full house and breaching the provision of the Conflict of Interest Act by granting unlawful advantages to themselves. The President, William Ruto, publicly denounced these practices during the devolution conference, insisting that parliamentary committees demand to be bribed to write reports or look the other way, which is their constitutional duty. This highlights the need for disciplinary measures, apprehension and prosecution to reinforce the needed discipline for the legislature. Shillings 4 billion CDF bursaries, cash cannot be traced. The Auditor General revealed in an audit report for the year 2023-2024 that 4.1 billion from 125 constituencies reported as bursary payments through the National Government Constituency Development Fund, which ought to be winding up by June 2026, cannot be accounted for, which puts members of parliament on the spot for mismanagement of the kitty, and yet another glaring conflict of interest, which has been guided by both the Supreme Court and the High Court, that their work is legislation, not development, a finding now being reinforced by the Auditor General. These scandals are not isolated incidents, but symptoms of a systemic problem. The unchecked use of public office for personal or political gain reflects a long-standing culture of impunity where laws are ignored and ethical boundaries are consistently crossed. We demand bold, visible, and enforceable action. Specifically, first, the full implementation of the Conflict of Interest Act of 2025 be prioritized by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission as per Section 5 of the Act and supported by all arms of government. This includes mandatory declaration of interest, enforcement of penalties, proactive compliance checks across ministries, departments, and agencies, and cancellation of the ones that have already been reported to be contracts with conflicted interest. The enforcement of the Conflict of Interest Act 2025 must also be prioritized at the county level, where serious concerns have emerged over misuse of public funds, including instances where governors and senior officials are awarding contracts to companies owned by relatives, associates, or proxies. Such practices are a direct violation of the Act and the principles of accountability and devolution, and also the leadership and integrity chapter. The full implementation and public accessibility of beneficial ownership register as required under the Companies Act, Beneficial Ownership Information Amendment Regulations of 2022, and the Companies Beneficial Ownership Regulations of 2020 is essential for detecting hidden interest by public in companies receiving state contracts. Linking this registry to procurement systems would expose conflicts of interest in real time rather than forcing or subjecting Kenyans, especially members of the media and civil society, to investigations both here in Kenya and other countries for proxy companies.